Okay, welcome to Service Pending Operator weekly call. Today is April 22nd, 28th, 2022. So we have few items. Let's see how, based on the time, we can try to fit in this 30 minutes. Otherwise, we can move this some of the agenda to next meeting. So I think Karthik, you can start with this first topic, SPO health chart that you're doing.
Yeah, sure. 1 second, I'll share my
You want
screen.
to share? Okay, 1 second.
Yeah,
Let me stop sharing.
let me know once you're able to see.
Yeah, okay. Got it.
You're able to see?
Yes, it's coming up.
Yeah. So as part of that Helm chart, I mean the test which we are running there, so that image, the Docker image for it, has to be placed as per in our source code itself. So I was just looking for the directory structure which has to be followed for keeping it. So just wanted to have a discussion on that. If it is fine to have it in a chart utility directory, or if someone can suggest some other place for it.
The
Uh,
Docker
Yeah, the
file.
Docker file and the test acceptance, which is used as the entry point for the test. If we place it inside the
Can
charts,
we
basically I'm using it
can
for, sorry.
sorry, I thought you were finished, but I think we have a hack directory. You can place it there, so we don't need to create a new chart utility one.
Okay, in the hack directory. Okay, okay. As a chart utility, right? In the
Yeah,
hack.
I would suggest to create a subfolder called chart or something, and then to place it there.
Okay, yeah, understood. Yeah.
It's my suggestion, of course.
I mean, the Docker files you could always qualify like you did, right?
Mm-hmm.
Chart
Right.
test. You could say Docker file chart test, and then put it on the root directory as well. So it's part of the
Okay.
build, right? So
Yeah.
we have to build it as part of the build.
Correct. Yes, right.
So I don't mind that being on the root directory either.
Sure.
Okay, both okay, the Docker file and the text is at the root directory itself, right? Okay.
Well,
I
this
think therefore they have
the
in
entry
export.
point,
Yeah, the entry point is the text acceptance
test
itself.
acceptance
So,
script. Right.
right, yeah. And yeah, that both of them can be placed at the root level itself. That should be fine.
But
That should be,
qualify with chart, right?
right,
So
yeah.
we know chart test acceptance and chart, and then Dockerfile dot chart
Ah,
test, right?
Or maybe not call it like test acceptance. That was a temporary name actually, but call
correct.
it like chart
SVN
entry
chart.
point.
Chart
Understood.
entry point, exactly.
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah, yeah.
Chart,
Okay.
chart,
Yeah.
test chart entry point or something like that.
Right. Yeah,
Oh,
this image needs to be built now alongside the normal build, and then it'll
right.
be placed in Quay. Similar situation. So we're gonna have to add changes to the make file, right?
Okay. Right. And like at the moment, I'm pushing it to my account only. That also needs to be changed, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Okay. Right.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll make the changes accordingly. Okay. Yeah. All right. And that's it from my side for this.
Yeah,
okay, so
that experience is still weird, so
Mm-hmm.
we need to document it and find a way to try to get rid of that extra secret that needs to be created, right?
Right. Yes. Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you explain what you feel weird, David?
Yeah. So basically, when you install the chart, you do chart install, right? And then it comes down, and then what Kartik is building is like a smoke test to make sure that the SBO is working. As part of Helm, you can put it on a test directory under the templates, and then you can do Helm test, the release name, right, of the chart. That will give the user an idea that I install SBO, but it's also working, right? There's no the smoke test is passing. But the problem is we need to run that test inside the container, and then that container needs a context to be able to talk to the API. So the way and then the test case is not designed today to be able to get the in cluster context. So we need to pass in the context so
I
the test
see.
can run. But so that experience is a little bit weird because the user will
Yeah.
have to add a secret,
you know-
then do helm test, right?
So David, let me clarify. Stone, the original idea for this test is to reuse our acceptance testing framework that we already have,
Right.
and run the smoke subset of the tests, right? To reuse whatever we have already. That's the
So
whole stuff. And that framework is, as David has said, not meant to be used, or well, it is meant to be used to simulate user. So talking to a cluster as a black box from outside, using the like publicly available API, not the internal stuff. That is what we need the
Okay.
context for.
Okay.
David, you're on mute.
So I think we are through with the discussion. So the next,
One extra step. One extra thing is that the console, for example, has that already. Where I mean, we don't need to pass the context, right? It already has the context based on the user that logged in, right? So we wanna do the same thing. So we'll do some investigation on that to clean that up.
Thanks for explaining.
okay. Okay, then let's move on to the next topic. That is something that some of our feedback or experience notes that we taken while we are working on a Shifty Week project. So we would like to discuss on that. This is started by me, Penny, and Karthik. We did this some example project sometimes back, decorating with service finding operator and more realistic application. So how do we, Penny, you want to start or give a, or Karthik?
I think I'm having like noises at my place. Karthik, can you like, pick up?
Yeah, no problem. I mean, like we were working on this on the developer shift week, and at that point of time, we noticed like when you're using the Crunchy Postgres, so like we were using the same annotations as defined on our registry file, and we did find that instead of using the using the annotations as defined, we could have used the, another key there, and the direct binding could be made. And apart from that, like when we are using instead of running the operator 24/7, we can make use of the client libraries which are available, and we can still you have the same experience which we want the user to have, like creating a service binding route, and the data is getting injected like what we tested, like how we are testing it in local, right? We just simply place the secret value over there in the directory path for our secret directory path for our connection string in the binding root directory, and then we are able to connect to the application. So similarly, like that was something like for which we thought that why would a user keep it running for 24/7, and they might just have the same application to be made possible to be binded using the same client libraries. That was another point which we noticed there. Yes, and Baiju, can you elaborate on the third point?
Yeah. Just let me clarify a little more. So we use something called, if I remember correctly, that was something called PG bouncer
PG bouncer URL.
URI, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
that. Yeah, it has the complete that username, password, everything like a URI format. So that's what we ended up using. We didn't use the individual,
yeah, container files.
these values. And also we noticed that there are some duplicate entries that we are creating. For example, see this database, right? And
I can
there is
explain
already
that.
there is already value called DB name, and so we are creating at another alias database, and there is something called username we are creating, but there is already a entry called user, which is so. Yeah, my point is that so there are if a developer is looking into this application, they could use any other fields because we are already mounting, for example, see the entire secret is mounted, so any of those values could be used. So that means the choice is ultimately the application developer, they can decide. And now my one question is, do we really have any real value adding this kind of extra aliases like this, like a database or username
Yeah, good
from
question.
our end? So these
Yeah.
are the questions
And
that
you're saying the secret you
Actually-
mount at the end also has some fields, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
the-
We
the-
use
yeah.
something called BG bouncer URI, which contains all these values like in a URL format. That is more convenient for connecting from a, I think, JDBC style, connector from application. So
The point of keeping the duplicate database and username was to make those values sort of a standard way, standardized, right? So that in the binding data, if an application finds a field called username, then it wouldn't matter, no matter if you use Postgres operator or you use like the Crunchy one or any other one. And the point of having these is that the Crunchy, this particular implementation of an Postgres database has these values stored in the DB name and user, right? But the applications that we use and also other database vendors, not just Postgres but also MySQL and others that we see, use username and database sort of names of for the values. So the point, it also came from the service binding, from the cloud native binding library or something. They used these, or they expected that the data would be in these particular names, right? That's the reason why it's mapped like this. So it's sort of standardized or
So
unified. That's the reason why we
yeah.
why we keep it here like that.
can I so there is one aspect which is around abstracting away the database that is getting used to have some sort of a standardization around what are the binding data that are needed for any kind of databases. What is the common denominator between each of the databases? So that is one aspect. But I think from what I understood from Kartikeya is that user is confused. It doesn't know exactly what binding has been created and what are all the things that are available. And it feels to me that it is a kind of a user feedback that we are not providing in the status of the service binding. So I have no idea what has been projected, and we are not giving an information to the user of where it has been projected and where he can find the project binding data. So we have to be careful about that aspect, I think, because confusion sometimes comes with hiding too much of the magic that we are building.
Okay. One suggestion is do
Why
you really?
silence? Big silence.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with Steven.
Yeah, I think that the whole idea of having some operators work out of the box is to introducing that magic.
It is to introduce that magic. I agree, but without. If I create the binding on Odyssey, for example, or if I create the binding somewhere, I have no feedback about what's happening. In fact, in
Yes.
Odyssey, I do the drag and drop between the database and my application. That's cool. There is a lot of magic, but as a developer now, I should be able to know, okay, so it means that a binding has been created, a service binding resource has been created, the binding information have been injected as environment variables, which have this a specific format,
Mhm.
or they have been mounted as a config file. And I would like to know that. I would like to be able to visualize that and to be guided into how I can leverage those binding from. How can I consume those inject
Right.
data?
So one suggestion there is yes. I mean, as a developer, I want to know where the fields that will come in, right? So do we have a way to advertise that today, especially with the ones that we do out of the box? Because everything is magic. There's no documentation about provision servers or anything like that, right? So the
Yeah.
user won't be able to know until the secret is actually created what is there. So it's sort of like if I was a developer, what I would do is like, okay, let me do the binding, let me see it fail, let me get in the container, let me see what the data I have. Oh, okay, I have all this data, but now I have two database names. Which one do I use? They're the same now, but in the future it might be different. So which one do I use, right?
Yeah.
So can we hide all that complexity with SDKs? I mean, I think the idea eventually is that the user don't even need to know. They just need to use the service binding SDK that knows these things, right? I've seen Baidu that worked on some SDK before. There's some other people that work on SDKs. I think as a developer, it'd be nice to say, yeah, the magic is gonna happen for this, but if I use the SDK, I'll get the object,
Yeah.
and then let the SDK handle that for me.
Yeah. But if I have no clue about what's going to happen, I also need to know that there is an SDK that is available.
Correct. Yep. I need
So
to know the SDK is available and the data structure that the
yeah,
SDK
yeah.
is gonna give you, right?
So I would love if, for example, inside of Odyssey, we were able to provide an output that is saying, hey, you create the binding relationship between service A and application B. You can find the project binding information as environment variables here. Your application is a Java application, is a PHP application, whatever. Please use the following SDK
Right.
and use those following, and then
Data structures. Yeah.
we provide a code snippet that allow to retrieve the binding.
Mhm.
So so I paste the link to an epic that I think I have created few time ago, which is around this. But I think we discussed that few times in the
Right.
past. And I do believe that it's not a feature that needs to be provided only from Odyssey, but from all the different clients that are going to create the service binding. Could be Goodio, could be Managed Kafka CLI, could be whatever solution that is getting used to create the service binding. So that's why, in my opinion, it should be something that is driven from the engine instead of the clients.
I have another
Yeah.
question on that. Why do we bind the whole secret? Is there extra data that we need in addition to those that we duplicate?
Yeah, I think
There is a host name
host name,
and
yeah.
port information.
Host port.
But
Host
can
name
we
and
do
port.
all the mapping and then get rid of the duplicates?
Yes.
I'm in favor of getting rid of the duplicate. Do the whole mapping. Don't map the secret directly. Just do the mapping, right?
It
And
would,
then that
make more sense.
way,
It would make more sense not to expose everything there. Those there might be things that we are not, we do not care.
exactly.
But
Yeah,
it
okay.
can be done like you specifically specify the additional fields
Port,
by mapping.
blah blah blah.
Yeah, 1 second. In this case, let's say if they're making it as a what they call provision service, there is an issue somebody opened already, and then if people this is going to override that provision service, right? This is going to take
Correct.
precedence over.
Yeah. More or less,
Uh-huh.
yes.
Okay, that means how we're going to handle that. Once that means Renji data, once they make it a provision service, and if you are going to override it here, that's
If,
not going
if
to
they
be a good
make it a
situation.
provision service, we remove it from
In
here.
order
right?
to make it work with as a provision service, what you would need to do is to just use the services, bind it as provision service just with the secret, and then with the service binding resource, you would need to define the mapping for the type provider, username and password in that particular service binding, right? The point of this was to avoid that, so that you can drag and drop arrows in the topology view, right? But technically, to use it as a provision service out of the box, right, with using the secret, to make it work, you would need to define the mapping for that particular application that expects, a username and database instead of user and DB name and other stuff, right? So you would need to provide everything, not here, but in the SB for in each service binding resource. Right. So that is how it would work as with provision service. Then we don't need to have it.
Here, right?
I think like here.
We don't need it here. Okay.
And then again, the user or the one that tries the binding would need to understand what needs to be mapped to what, and
Right.
where he can find it. Right. So that would also that is where the sort of snippet or some advisory would help.
Right. And having an SDK. If I'm a service provider and then I want to create my secret, right? I want to understand what the developers would be expecting, right? And different providers can then say, oh, instead of database, I'm gonna call it database name or DB name, or different providers might have different. Then we lose the standardization, right? So we need to also find a way to guide the service providers to say, hey, these are the fields that the SDK expects, right? And then here's how you can test with the SDKs in different languages. So I think, the more I think about it, the more I think we need to work on the SDKs, make sure we can standardize on that. And also when you create the secret, right? This is another thing that I've been thinking about, but I mean, maybe we don't have time today. But when the secret is created, regardless how it was created, right? Could have been created by the provision service. It could have been created by the mapping that we have on here, right? By the mapping we have on out of the box services, or the annotations that we do, right? That's another way to do it. Eventually, when the service binding object comes online, the secret is going to be there, right? Being able to expose that in some of discoverable way that the user can come in and say, hey, show me all the services available today, and by the way, what's the format of the data that is going to be bound to my workload, right, ahead of time, so you can come back and adjust your workload, right? So I think that we're missing a feature in terms of what's the data that's going to be bound, that developers only find out now after it's already bound, and then they can start saying, oh, this is the data that I need to use, right? So we need to find a way to ahead of time tell them this is the data that will be bound. So I've been thinking of a way to say, let's get the service binding object there first, because we know some of these secrets get created after the service binding is reconciled, right? Let's get the service binding object there first, and then the application can come in. And that's where the label selector that Andy's working on will help us. So it'll be more of a discovery of what are the secrets and what are the labels that I need to add to my workload to match that to do the binding. And then what are the secrets that I'm expecting to be, what's the data that's expected to be coming, right? So I think, yeah,
I
definitely
agree.
we need some work. We need some work on discoverability. I think there's an epic for that. So let's go through some of those user experience scenarios, right, and see if we can improve that. SDK, I think, is also a good one. I repeat again.
Yeah, SDK, we need to choose the languages that we are going to support, and maybe, yeah, our preferred ones. So
And it's not hard, right? So I've seen the code from Baju is like a
yeah,
loop
that is
that
the very
goes
generic
through.
one. Yeah,
Yeah.
there are few already in that. Some of them are very advanced, which is tied to that framework. For example, there was in Java, which is specific to that Spring framework.
Right.
See, yeah, this is
Yeah,
some,
but
and there
maybe
is
instead
Quarkus.
of
Yeah, so this is, I think it's more tied to Quarkus like that. So depending on, so I don't know if you're we really getting into this language specific framework or SDK. It's going to be bit more work, but that need a good understanding of that ecosystem also, right?
right.
And so,
But you see, the key, I think, because we make it very generic. The SDK is very generic in the sense that it's just a bunch of maps or dictionaries, right? Depending on the language, data structure is different, but it's pretty generic. It's just a key value pair, right?
okay.
The data structure that we output. I think we actually need to put out an object, right? Not a key value pair generic, but an object saying for this provider, this is the object that corresponds to that. And then in the spirit of standardization, I mean, that's so people can start looking, okay, this is the object,
Okay.
right? So I can do this dot database
Yeah.
as opposed to this off whatever free string. That's not a standard, right? So that's
Okay, I think
pretty
we have
generic.
just 1 minute time only. I just want to, okay, maybe the remaining topics we can discuss next week. I just remembered something while we are doing that project. I started using this my library, but we found that is not, there was some bug in this one, so I didn't got time to fix it. Then we ended using another one created by Ben. So this is what we ended up using. Okay, and that changing to this one was pretty only subtle difference in the API. Otherwise, it worked for us. So still not fixed. I don't know what was the issue with my library. Just a heads up in case if some people try it out. It's not working. There is some bug.
So it's all cool that we have open source,
Yeah.
but I think we need to create a downstream with these
Okay.
things, right? We need to create a downstream eventually, and then if we need to make any changes, we make it downstream, right?
Okay. Okay. So I think then let's try to wrap up because the remaining topics we can move on to the next time. I think Finny also has something to discuss. So let's discuss next meeting. Okay.
Yeah.
Our time is up. Thank you.
Cool. All right.